The Ringer's music critic Rob Harvilla curates and explores 60 iconic songs from the 90s that define the decade. Rob is joined by a variety of guests to break it all down as they turn back the clock. Check out 60 Songs That Explain the 90s exclusively on Spotify.
This episode is brought to you by Anytime Fitness. We may talk a whole lot about sports, but when it comes to keeping fit ourselves, there's definitely room for improvement. I hit this point early July. I was just like, I am not in good enough shape. I started trying to walk at least 15,000 steps a day or hiking or just anything to keep my legs moving. Now it's the end of 2023. I feel great. I had a physical 3 weeks ago and the guy was like, you're doing great. You're doing better than you were 3 years ago. I felt great. Whatever your goals are, progress is possible thanks to Anytime Fitness. Get a personalized plan and support from an expert coach anytime, anywhere. Visit anytimefitness.com to try Anytime Fitness for free. Start to train for your life. Terms, conditions, and restrictions apply. See website for details.
This episode is brought to you by State Farm. From your morning podcast to your afternoon playlist, State Farm knows you personalize your entire day. And that's why State Farm helps you personalize your insurance with the State Farm Personal Price Plan. It offers coverage options that help protect what you care about most at an affordable price just for you. Like a good neighbor, State Farm is there. Prices vary by state. Options selected by customer. Availability and eligibility may vary.
I need support staff to clear the room. Stand up and walk now.
Hello and welcome to The Watch. My name is Chris Ryan. I am an editor at TheRinger.com, and joining me on the other line, you can check out, but you can never leave. It's Andy Greenwald.
Oh, because on the first take you said you could check in, but you could never leave. Which
yeah, well,
isn't
that was
surprising.
why we do multiple texts. Yeah.
Right. I get it.
I'm making hotel jokes, Andy. That's a Hotel California reference for our younger listeners, but we must have like 6 or 7 younger listeners. But that was a Hotel California joke. We are actually talking about a different hotel. We're talking about the White Lotus, which is the fictional resort of Mike White's new show on HBO. That's what we're going to be discussing today. And then we have a mailbag section. We're recording this midweek the previous week, so this is airing on Monday, so forgive us if there's any breaking news. If it's really, really important, I'll maybe we can do a topper and just be like, hey guys,
we haven't watched Black Widow. Sorry about that.
We haven't seen Black Widow yet. That's correct.
We will,
but we'll
talk about it.
Yeah.
I'm sure there's some hijinks
today,
in the
man?
fine Marvel fashion. I'm good. I'm excited to talk to you about all these topics. I feel like Can I get a little emo with you? It's very moving to me when you send up the signal flare being like, could we have some reader questions? And the readers, this is how old I am, listener questions. And the listeners have questions and they're all very thoughtful and good. And we're very grateful for them.
Do you like it when the questions are like, when will Andy apologize for this take or that take?
Well, what's even better, I should say this too, in the spirit of emotion and friendship in this podcast, is you kind of look at them more than I do. So you shelter me, you protect me. Some might say I
do a little bit of a filter.
You cradle me. Yeah. So this is news to me. The answer, as always, is absolutely not. I will die on Bad Take Hill, and I apologize for nothing. But thank you.
Let's get into White Lotus, which is we've got a few weeks now without a sort of prestige HBO Sunday night show. I guess since Mayor of Easttown. Which is not uncommon, but typically in the sort of in the golden days of peak prestige TV, like you would probably have what would happen is like you would just go one right into the other. Maybe there would be a week in between, but then there would be another HBO show. Obviously,
or
stuff has been generally.
Sorry to jump in, but I think the other thing that we're missing is not just that HBO doesn't have the pipeline as smoothly as they would have liked due to COVID and scheduling and production delays. The competitors don't either. And there definitely was, over the past few years, we saw a rise in pretty exacting counter programming, where if there was, if Succession season 3 had aired as it was intended to last year, FX or AMC might have lined up the return or the debut of something spicy for the following week or even the following day to kind of be like, hey, migratory birds, come this way. And everybody's schedules are effed. So
I like the idea that like a television network would be trying to win the morning edition of the next day's papers.
But it does feel kind of old school.
We gotta take the Game of Thrones news cycle back.
I don't think they talk like that anymore, but they do. The rat-tat-tat style has fallen out of vogue, but I do think that was a part.
Tell you, boy, Winchell, he's got to watch Walking Dead premiering on Sunday night.
I'm gonna. Do you want to do one more? Because rule of threes.
Nobody's watching Mr. In Between, but they got to do it. We're going to have headlines. We're going to have copy.
Because we're going to put it, Mr. In Between, Mayor of Easttown and Better Call Saul. There, see? We put a bow on it. I do think there was some thinking in that way. I think there was an erosion of that with Netflix's we're just going to throw it all out there all the time strategy and just blanket things. And now, we'll see how things shake out. There has been no strategy because there couldn't be.
So we got a little bit of while we had this time off, obviously we also had we've had Loki, which we talked about on Thursday's show, and the finale is this week. But so it's not like there hasn't been things going on. I just remarking specifically about that Sunday night sort of slot. As you mentioned, the COVID has, and we're still feeling like we're just really feeling the effects of the COVID slowdown, but also the COVID choice economy, I guess you could say. This show, White Lotus, is set in Hawaii. I assume it was shot in Hawaii.
It was.
It comes to us from Mike White, who a lot of people may know. Well, a lot of people may know him from Survivor because he's on Survivor and Amazing Race. A lot of people know him as the writer of School of Rock, but is obviously a very important TV creator in his own right. He came up writing for Freaks and Geeks and Dawson's Creek. And really, I think the show that he is most well known for is Enlightened, which is, I think, for some people, one of the most like sort of criminally underrated TV shows of the last 10 to 15 years. When I learned this from the Vulture profile on Jennifer Coolidge, when who's in White Lotus, when Mike White pitched this show, like HBO had basically asked him for something that was COVID friendly, something that would be somewhat easy to make with the production protocols that are in place. And fucking shout out to Mike White, because this guy was like, man, COVID friendly, huh? Have you guys thought about maybe sending me to Hawaii for a few months?
It's so smart. I did not know that piece of information either until that Vulture piece. Kudos. Like, honestly, what an incredible... I mean, I actually on a number of levels. Yes, if ever given the chance to just write your own story and get to go to a place in the middle of COVID being like, sorry, have to go to Maui for 6 weeks, that is boss level and deserves all the respect. But I also think it's kind of exciting just as purely as a creative choice. The other thing that came out of that Vulture profile was that he had been developing for a number of years a different vehicle for Jennifer Coolidge, who we keep saying her name. People, know her, even if you don't recognize her name. People might remember her from her amazing turns in the Christopher Guest movies like Best in Show, or in the American Pie movie series. And she's a beloved comedic actress, but he's friendly with her and wanted to show other sides of her as a performer and was developing a series with her. And when he got the call, I mean, sometimes creativity needs guardrails and and just do something else instead. And it does feel like this opened up something else, like just in terms of not just obviously getting it into production, which is always the goal because it did scratch an itch on Casey Bloys' schedule, but in its own right, it is a compelling and interesting use of the form. Yeah. I just think it's an interesting series for this moment, and as we get into talking about it, you'll hear us say why.
I want to talk to you a lot about obviously what's happening in this show and the way it's told, but I thought maybe we could start, if it's okay with you, with a formatting question. So this is an hour-long dramedy. It's about a group of people who are tourists at this luxury resort in Hawaii. It starts, the first episode's called Arrivals. It begins with this ensemble essentially arriving on a boat, and Murray Bartlett, who you might remember from Looking, is greeting them. He's the manager of the hotel. They immediately kind of set up an upstairs, downstairs sort of dynamic where it's going to be these sort of pampered tourists and the hardworking employees of the hotel intermingling, like viewing each other in different ways. It's a great cast: Jake Lacey, Alexandra Daddario, Connie Britton, Steve Zahn, Natasha Rothwell, like a lot of really like great, funny people. Coolidge, obviously. Sydney Sweeney from Euphoria. And when this is sort of rolling out and as like it kind of goes on, I personally was struck by the fact that it's a limited series, because it seems conceptually, now I think you could return to this if you wanted to, but conceptually, like this is what long running TV shows are made of. You know, you could do a season with a group of guests. You could do like, you could follow those guests back to the real world. You could have the guests return for some reason. But I was actually struck by like most of the limited series that we come across are either big star vehicles because you can only get Kate Winslet for so long, or they're mysteries and you want to give people like a real finite fever pitch of speculation about what's going to happen. How's The Undoing going to end? How's Big Little Lies going to end? How's Mare of Easttown going to end? This is kind of like a real slice of life character study. There is a framing device that makes you think that you're going to get like a, you know, that suggests there's going to be a big mystery to it. But at least in the first episode, that's hardly even alluded to beyond the framing device. So I was curious what you thought about like the actual format of the show.
Yeah, I think it's very smart in a lot of ways. It's very 2021 smart because it is flexible.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just flexible because it was relatively COVID friendly, focus on a small group of cast who are who are basically in hotel rooms or poolside in a place that at the time when they filmed, I imagine, was doing fairly well with COVID. Like it was very smart for that reason. But I think it's also smart in a kind of Duplass Brothers Room 104 kind of way. And for people who don't remember that show, we talk to Mark almost every season, I feel like, for that show. But that was a kind of a cool experimental, very much in his wheelhouse anthology show where every episode was set in the same hotel room with different guests, and it allowed different filmmakers and actors to come play. And that was creatively engaging for him, a nice feather in HBO's late night cap, and also cost effective because it was just one set. I think the exciting thing about a show like White Lotus is you have a creator's very specific sensibility. You have a beautiful and compelling location. I mean, we'll get into it, but like I am very fondly disposed towards the show from jump because I also would like to go to a resort in Hawaii, and I enjoy spending. I know it's controversial. I enjoy spending time in the fictional world of the show for that reason. But to your point, this could just be a limited series. You know, I think this was probably fairly cost effective, and it was a good production experience for people involved, and it's getting good reviews. It could be the end of it. Mm-hmm. Or if it gets a lot of notice or acclaim, or it was a positive experience for everyone, and if Mike White has further ideas, Murray Bartlett comes back for season 2 with the hotel staff and a whole new group comes in.
Right.
And that is the kind of optionality that I think executives really want now, more than a prestige series that's only going to go 7 episodes because you can only get the Oscar winner for that amount of time, or the potentially ongoing, infinitely ongoing show that's going to by nature be set up for most of a year, and you could lose the opportunity. That said, the framing device here is canny. You know, it's just clever. Mm-hmm. It is, the show begins with a dead body, and so that bing, scratch it off on your prestige TV bingo card. That's kind of how you may hook people. I was interested, just as a quick digression, that in the rave reviews of the show that I've read, it didn't get dinged for that interesting thing that happened 7 days earlier.
Right.
Which Physical got reamed for doing. Maybe because this is a limited series, and Physical, at least by the impression it's giving us, is an unlimited series, which doesn't actually exist, but you know what I mean.
Sure.
So it's a smart framing device.
Unless you're SVU, that's unlimited.
Everything Dick Wolf makes is unlimited.
Yeah,
unlimited Wolf.
Are we just like? Do we need to give framing devices? We need to put them in some sort of penalty box.
I was surprised by that. I mean, I think that there is a
or
level.
Are you just sort of like saying that's a double standard to say it's like works here?
I just thought it was interesting. I mean, it's easy for me to say because I am, as the listeners of this podcast will absolutely attest, out of the reviewing rat race. Mm-hmm. I am not watching everything. Spoiler alert. Shocker. When I was watching everything, I would often get either frustrated or just
You
annoyed
get
or
allergies
overwhelmed.
to certain things.
That's a better way of putting it. And sometimes I would write a story
and my
like
boy,
these things.
my boy sometimes gets allergies.
My boy gets the sniffles on occasion. He's got some seasonal stuff. Yeah, and so it strikes me as a very, very critic complaint.
Mhm.
I don't. Maybe I'm wrong. Listeners, let us know. Are you seeing so many pilots that begin with the interesting thing 5 years earlier?
Right.
And yes, it's become a crutch. It's become a cliche. It's become a way for shows that aren't necessarily skilled with exposition to be like, trust us, it's going to get good, but we're not going to show you the good part. But I just noted that this didn't seem to bother anyone. But it's also maybe because critics got all 6 episodes of the White Lotus and they seem to have burned through.
Yeah,
We haven't. We're going
sent
one
out
at a
the
time.
entire thing. They sent out the entire thing. I want to pitch a show where like the framing device is the end of Fight Club, but the show is basically like How I Met Your Mother.
Yes.
So it's just like,
isn't that Kevin Can Go F himself? Isn't that?
well, you know what I
a
mean? Though I
similar-
want to have so it ends like when we open up, right? And the White House explodes.
Yeah.
Cut to 7 days earlier, and a guy walks into a coffee shop and meets like.
I mean, I like that because isn't that how life works, Chris? You know,
we're getting there.
One
We're on the
day
road.
you log on to Instagram, the next thing you know, you're storming the Capitol. I just mean life is a whirlwind.
I was really pleasantly like brought into this because I think I immediately, I've only been to Hawaii once. It's not like I'm like just skipping over there all the time, but I think that there's been a lot of TV in the last year. And we've spent a lot of time talking about Mandalorian and WandaVision and Loki. And I'm not like comparing White Lotus to those things. I would even put Mare of Easttown in there. I would put all sorts of things, even Better Call Saul, where you're watching the show and a lot of the work that you're doing is keeping up with the world construction and learning the rules of whatever the game is that we're playing and assembling all of the different interpersonal relationships and what they might mean for some sort of end game. And just like a lot of like, it's very active viewership when you're watching a lot of TV these days. And the thing I liked a lot about White Lotus is that it wasn't, it's obviously a satire. It's got a lot of, dark comedic elements. It's also a drama. It felt very recognizable. You know what I mean? Like, I think that just the act of people going to a hotel, there are some people working at the hotel, there are some people having some kiwi at the hotel. Like, I was like, I know I can recognize this. I get this. And it's strange that is such a rare occurrence on television.
I like that you make that point, and I agree with you. I picked up on that too. And I guess I want to begin by saying, Mike White is a very, very good storyteller. His plotting, his pacing, his structure, like all the kind of statistical things that, like, he's got them, and he clearly worked very hard on this show. But I wonder if, to a degree, the way that if it was as simple as that Vulture article suggests, and I'm sure it wasn't as simple, but there's an element of truth to it, that Casey Bloys called Mike White and was like, hey, you got anything? Because we've got this window. I wonder if the opening of the door, that the creative process maybe was more straightforward than usual. I wonder if we're seeing that reflected. Speaking from the other part of my life, the current landscape of TV development is so, it's not just that it's crowded, it's so convoluted because the shifting metrics of what people want, who wants it, who's buying it for what's it going to be, and what every single thing has to do is very, very opaque. I think certainly from a writer's perspective, but from what I've heard from buyers and sellers in the industry as well, and the executive levels, all the hoops that a project has to jump through just to be vetted as worthy. Is this noisy? Is this zeitgeisty? Is this related to any IP? Is this going to go with the other things that people are watching? Is this going to be noticed? Like, when you start having those conversations, when an idea is just a baby idea, it's going to either suffocate or mutate in ways that feel labored or feel complicated.
Yeah.
And I think that what you just said really clarified actually why I feel positively about this show, even when I found aspects of it not entirely my jam, at least as of one episode in.
Yeah, there's there's a real assuredness to the writing. There's, I don't know if I would say modesty, because that would imply that like he's not trying to say a lot. And this is obviously a show that's going to look into ideas of privilege and ideas of what actually constitutes a family, and like what you owe members of your family versus, you know, what you owe humanity. But there's like it's an unbusy depiction of those things. And, you know, this is not necessarily a one-to-one comparison, but you take something like the Gossip Girl reboot, which has like some things to recommend about it. I'm not saying it doesn't, but it is so busy. It's like they had like this list of things that they were like, we must get this joke and this idea and this has to happen, and then we have to have this, and you're just like, this is a show, but it's also like a to-do list. You know, you guys wanted to like make sure all this crap, like we have to have like a hashtag, and then we also have to have like a reference to like 14 different restaurants in New York, but this person also like has to have like this kind of relationship with this person, and you're just like, dog, I'm just trying to watch Gossip Girl. You know what I mean? Like I'm trying to like like process what I'm seeing here. Whereas like the sort of the pacing and the tone of White Lotus is a lot more like glacial. It's just like we're floating in, and like you're going to get to know these people, and you're going to like some of them, and you're going to dislike some of them, and you're going to laugh at some of them, and you're going to laugh with some of them. And that's kind of what's happening here.
It's a COVID show. It's bubbled. It's bubbled off from the normal development process and from the new normal demands of what a show has to be, which increasingly isn't just a TV show. I mean, you know, that sounds grandiose. I mean, we're saying this, it's July, like the broadcast networks have picked up their pilots, like old TV is still going, you know what I mean? And Dick Wolf's FBI Des Moines spinoff like does not also need to be a brand and a hashtag. It just is a show about FBI agents solving stuff.
Yeah.
But at the type of show we're talking about in the market, the corner of the marketplace we're talking about, I think that that's where we're at.
So let's talk a little bit more specifically. I mean, there's not a ton of plot to get through other than, you know, that you've got sort of a middle-aged couple with their 2 kids and their daughter's friend who arrive, a group of 5. Then you've got a newlywed couple.
And that's Connie Britton, the great Connie Britton from Friday Night Lights in Nashville. She's playing kind of like the founder of a Goop type company. And he's her husband who's not as successful, and their 2 teenage kids and their teenage daughter's friend.
Right. And then you've got a newlywed couple played by Jake Lacy and Alexandra Daddario. And then you've got a single woman played by Jennifer Coolidge, who's come with her mother's ashes that she wants to scatter at some point during this vacation. So that's really the setup. And then you've got the hotel staff, Murray Bartlett, Natasha Rothwell, who I mentioned, who's on Insecure. And then you just get basically a lot of introductions, a lot of sort of getting to know you. There isn't like an inciting incident. There isn't like a crisis point. You can tell that there's tension. You can tell there's going to be squabbles. A lot of the comedy and drama are derived from anybody who has spent much time on TripAdvisor message boards will recognize a lot of the sort of quibbles. And Jake Lacy plays this sort of spoiled brat real estate guy who is really annoyed about the room he gets and can't let it go. And that's essentially like the major like drama of the show so far. So I guess like what we get down to then is, you mentioned your cup of tea, like it's the tone. It's the Mike White tone, which I think is unquestionably like accomplished. I personally enjoyed this more than some other stuff that I've seen of his. But what did you think?
Yeah, I think that he's a really unique and compelling creator to my mind, because I think that he has an ear for and interest in the kind of quotidian resentments and hopes and fears and disappointments that are immediately recognizable to anyone. You know, the Jake Lacy on his honeymoon being unable to let go of the fact that he thinks he was cheated. That's a feeling. Alexandra Daddario by the pool getting just roasted and dragged by teens and her uncomfortable navigation of that, and her watching the kind of flickering candle of hope in her eyes die is just amazing. The angst of Steve Zahn, like wanting to be a good dad to a kid he doesn't understand or know how to say "I love you" to. Like these are very well observed things that are hugely valuable. They are the kind of observations of, the minutia of existence that made Enlightened so beloved. And I'm so grateful they're on my TV, and I'm excited about them.
Yeah, and I think that he captures the fact that when people go on vacation, they actually do not take a vacation from themselves.
Exactly.
And what happens, I mean, I don't know about you, but when I go on vacation, a lot of the time, the conversations tend to be a little bit more vulnerable or deeper because like there isn't the day-to-day stuff to talk about. I'm sure like when you go on vacation with your family, you have to like talk about the kids all day because you're like managing them or whatever. But like, I just mean like when you get to the end of the day, it's not like, what did you do today? Because it's you were with me all day.
This isn't international football, Chris. I don't manage them. I coach them up. You know what I mean?
You're every not Roberto Mancini. You're not just
every morning I kneel down, look them in the eyes, and tell them to be excellent.
You set the cones out.
Yeah.
Okay.
But
I interrupted you. You were saying about the tone.
No, I think that's really well observed, and I think that there's just the most delicious moment in this pilot comes near the end where there's this health scare that Steve Zahn is experiencing, and again, like that carried over from the mainland with him. You can't sort of shrug it off, and the collision between two completely different worldviews, which is something that I can relate to in terms of whether news is going to be bad or good. Like I can tell someone and mean it intellectually that the odds of an unknown turning out well are just as good as them turning out bad, and probably better than them turning out catastrophic. But if I'm waiting on hold for a doctor who called me, I mean, I have all of it. I have the plague.
You're like picking who's going to give your eulogy. Yeah.
Yes. And so that moment where Connie Britton, let's just keep it moving. When Connie Britton, I mean, you could be a pallbearer. Yeah, you could.
No, come on. I can't give a speech.
You could give some remarks. Yeah.
Are you worried I would go off script? Are you worried are you worried that I would steal the spotlight?
A little bit.
Are you worried that they would be like the CR?
Yes, I'm worried about a CR head infiltration of my last hurrah, basically. Yeah.
I'm sorry. Okay.
You remember, it's not just you taking the microphone, it's a movement. And that's when I begin to get a little antsy. Anyway, it's that last scene where, Connie Britton is like, it's going to be fine. And he's not like, it's such a keen observation of a marriage and a dynamic. And I think that's great. I think what you get with Mike White is not just those observational abilities and interest in emotional storytelling that very much align with my tastes. You also get his very specific, very acidic comedy and worldview, which is it's demeaning to say it's cringe, although sometimes it does make me and potentially others cringe. I think it's more complicated than that. But he does like to take things and run them all the way up to the point of discomfort, and sometimes tip them a little bit past that. And it leads me to have, you mentioned my allergies, and I like checking this when we talk to each other and we talk about shows, especially pilot episodes. Like it did run afoul of my like, wait, am I trapped in this world thing at first, particularly because I was like, he's so empathetic in a way about his characters, but also maybe he hates all humans. Maybe there's something misanthropic here. Sometimes to me, it tips more in that direction. And that's when I start to resist. That said, as with other shows we've watched recently, like Physical, like I tamped myself down and I watched the episode, and I'm going to keep watching other episodes. But, it is worth noting that for some people, like Jennifer Coolidge's energy is a thing. It's a choice. It's big. It not in her performance, but in terms of it can be destabilizing for the type of show you think you're watching.
You might like Jennifer Coolidge. You might like Dennis Leary. You might like, what I mean? Like there's different kinds of vibes out there.
Also, you should know that like Steve Zahn, like, isn't just concerned about his medical condition. We are introduced to his character with a full screen view of his bait and tackle, or some extras or a stunt balls. Speaking of Speaking of European League football. So, you should know that going in. That's cool. But again, there are these choices. And similarly, just to mention it, like, I love Murray Bartlett. I think he was one of the best actors on Looking.
Yeah.
I'm so glad to see him get more parts, especially one where he can use his native accent. But he's killing it as this like harried, control freak of a hotel manager. But in the early going, like, sometimes that show feels different than the other shows, and I think it will shake out into a whole.
You mentioned does Mike White hate people? I don't think he does, but I don't think he cares if you like his characters that much.
Yeah, I think that's a good point.
I think that is, you're saying like, oh, it kind of like, am I trapped here with these people? I think that in each one of these characters, I see a little bit of myself, and I'm like, am I trapped here with myself? Am I trapped here with the parts of myself that it's the same thing for physical, like you were saying. It's like, do I really want to be hanging out for 35 minutes with someone who thinks that they themselves are a piece of shit? No,
usually I do therapy Zoom.
There is a part of me that thinks that about myself, and I don't want to spend that much time with that person. Do you know what I mean? So for that same thing, it's like, I have tendencies where like I don't really get caught up on. I'm actually like way more like, the room is the room. It's fine. Like, I never really get freaked out about the room stuff unless like the air conditioning doesn't work. I usually really like a cold hotel room, but like I wouldn't let it fuck me up for like days on end. Like, I'd be able to go to dinner. I'm pretty good at compartmentalizing, but watching Jake Lacy lose it, I'm like, oh my God, but there are things that I can't kind of keep in a box. And like watching this person unravel because of that, I'm like, oh God, is this going to be 6 weeks of this? Like,
I guess I agree with you. I think that's a very smart point. I think that maybe what I'm also responding to, and there's no way to get an answer to this other than watch the show, which we're going to do, but how you meet people, how and when you meet people, characters, is a crucial decision for a creator, particularly for a limited series where the assumption is, and I don't think it's a false one, is that you're going to go on a journey with them. Mm-hmm. And the Jake Lacy character is a great conversation point for that idea, because we meet him in the framing device, in the flash forward, and he seems like a bitter dick, basically. Mm-hmm. Perhaps because his new bride corpses being wheeled onto the plane, although I think that's absolutely not the case. I think it's a misdirect. Then we see him behave throughout the episode, and there's not much to recommend him then either. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? So I'm curious what Mike White intends to do with this character and say with him, because he seems pretty transparently unlikable. Not just unlikable, but just like kind of just what he is at both ends of our story. And so that those things give me a little bit of pause, but not enough to stop watching, obviously.
The tension of making satire, if indeed you want to call this satire, is that you have to like push characters and push these people into being like stereotypes to some extent. They have to be bigger than, like, they have to be so obnoxious that they're obviously almost cartoonishly privileged or cartoonishly obnoxious or cartoonishly self-centered or whatever it is. And then the further you push it, the more you basically have to rely on the laugh, because you're not going to have the relatability necessarily. Because it's going to, if you push and push and push, nobody's going to look at Jake Lacy and be like, I can totally relate to this guy because he's a fucking prick. So nobody's going to want to say that about themselves or whatever. Now, I am trying to like free my mind of relatability and likability and all these things. Like, I'm trying to move past it. I was listening to Soderbergh on Marin, and he's just like, it's a total lie that people can change in 2 hours, but movies pretend like they can. And I'm like, fuck, that's right. Why am I worried about this stuff? Why am I worried about like transformation and all these things? So like, let's go into this. Let's go into this with open minds. Let's go into this with newly formed ideas about character. How about that?
Wow. I love where you're at this summer. I love it. You've been to the White Lotus. I think you've had a craniosacral treatment.
Let's take a quick break, and we're going to get to your mailbag questions. This episode is brought to you by Mint Mobile. New Year's resolutions are fun the first couple of weeks. Then you kind of maybe conveniently forget about them halfway through January. No shame. It happens to us all. But this year I have a foolproof plan, at least when it comes to saving money. Just switch to Mint Mobile and you're done. Goal accomplished, because for a limited time, their wireless plans are $15 a month when you buy a 3-month plan. The great thing about Mint Mobile is there's no jaw-dropping monthly bills or unexpected overages, and all plans come with unlimited talk and text. Get this new customer offer today at mintmobile.com/watch. Additional taxes, fees, and restrictions apply. See Mint Mobile for details. All right, we're back. Greenwald, we have some really fun questions this time. The listeners really came through, so shouts to everybody on Twitter and on Facebook who sent in some questions.
And I'll say, Chris, I don't know if you agree with me, but because of the nature of our travel and summertime and vacation, if we don't get to your question today, my guess is we will be revisiting this, both because we want to answer your questions and for...
I really want to hear a solo Greenwald mailbag one of these days.
Wow. You did that once, right? Or
I just did a solo pod, but it was the longest half hour of my life. I don't think
legendary.
I can do it again.
Kaya and I still talk about it. It was...
Let's go with a big picture question first. This comes from Michael Mix, and he asks, I like this one a lot. Do you think at this point in your lives you could ever see a new movie or show and declare it your favorite of all time? Or does your favorite movie or show become set in stone when you were younger?
I love that question. I think about that a lot. I think the answer for me is no. Nothing can be my favorite again. And in fact, what I've noticed, and I'm as surprised about this as anyone, is that the whole notion of a favorite has fallen out of my brain and language. Mm-hmm. Both because as I've gotten older and have two children, many things have fallen out of my brain and language, just like, like pouring sand from a bucket at the beach. It's just not there anymore. But I think that profoundly, and I know I'm not alone in this with our listeners and just people in the world, like Chris and I, won't be a surprise. One of the ways that we kind of set the parameters of ourselves and did self-building as younger people was through lists of stuff. Mm-hmm. Before you're I'll use I statements. I won't implicate you in this, but I think you probably agree. Like before I had any sense of self or what I could do in the world, I was like, I am a list of these books and authors, these records, these movies. This is the taste that I'm building, but also the older person that I'm building and that I want to be. And you couple that with seeing things for the first time. It's kind of incredible. Like the music that you hear when you're a teenager is always going to be your favorite because you don't, not only does it mirror where you are emotionally and thoughts and feelings and everything new and exciting and matters and is amazing, but you also lack the context of how time works and how everything old is new again. And maybe you don't know that the thing you're falling in love with is indebted to the 20 years prior. And you don't want to think, because you also want to think that you are a unique newborn flower born at the perfect time of existence. All of that is to say, I find myself loving and appreciating things, I think, in a deeper way than I used to. But like my formative material has happened. They have been formed.
Yeah, I think that I'm trying to. I would completely agree with everything you're saying. I think people really conflate formative with best ever.
Right.
Like I was looking at the Ringer's 100 best episodes of the 21st century list that we did a couple of I guess a year or so back.
That was a great project.
Back. Yeah, it was awesome. And I was looking through that list of episodes, and I was struck by how I didn't have any things that I would have suggested for the 90s. You know what I mean? Like there would have been, I'm sure, like a half a dozen things I might have been able to think of off the top. Like there was like a homicide episode or whatever. Like there was TV in the 90s that I liked quite a bit. But those shows that we talked about in that list were also the shows that I would say, or the episodes that I would say are the greatest of all time. And we have a question coming up about that, precisely because that was when I think I was really like emerging, like my TV passion was emergent. I think TV as an art form was really blossoming, and people could say that about what's happening to TV now, and people could say that about what was happening to TV when Norman Lear was making television in the 70s or something. Like it really does have to do with that sort of age when you feel like you are coming with the most passion, and then also like the art form is meeting that moment, which it kind of always is. You just have to have the right frame of mind or the right perspective.
I think that's right. We recently had my soon-to-be 14-year-old cousin came to visit and stay with us out here, and which was great, and we had a wonderful time. But I felt very old when she asked me, she was talking about movies she'd seen and enjoyed, and I asked her if she'd seen certain directors, and she hadn't. We were talking about that, and then she was like, "Well, what's your favorite movie?" And I had no answer. I no longer had that facility. I didn't have a list. I couldn't say, well, these are the 3 or 4. My mind first went totally blank, and then just started pulling a weird melange of like, noir movies I fell in love with on Criterion in the last 6 months.
Sure.
And
like Pale Flower. Have you seen that? Yeah.
Pale Flower, great. And Muppets Take Manhattan or whatever when I was a kid, or Rushmore or whatever. I just, out of the heat of the moment, when you have a 14-year-old, soon-to-be 14-year-old staring daggers at you wanting an answer, I was like, oh, it's kind of great to just love. I know this sounds so weak and basic, but like to be like, I love movies.
Yeah,
I
sure.
love TV,
Yeah.
and I love loving things, but that is a different response than I think either of us would have had even 10 years ago.
Yeah, I think the most recent the most recent movie that I would say is like in contention for my favorite movie would be like Inglourious Bastards. But even Inglourious Bastards, if I say like, okay, like just to like assemble like a list in my head, it's like let's say it's like Jaws, Goodfellas, Heat, and like, I don't know, His Girl Friday and Inglourious Bastards. It's like Inglourious Bastards doesn't quite feel as significant as those movies to me, but like I also think Inglourious Bastards might, in some ways, is, I don't know. It's better than some of those movies. It's so weird. It's just like I just saw Inglourious Bastards like at a much later point in my life, and I've thought about it and rewatched it and all these things. But it's hard to say like, is it better than Jaws? Like I don't know.
When you watch it is different, and what it did to you is different. But as people who listen to this podcast know, like I think I speak for both of us. Like Le Bureau, Lonesome Dove. Fleabag season 2, certainly for me, or Mad Men. Like these are as important to me just as anything, and just how much we loved them. Like in that pure fandom that you can still access sometimes when something just makes you happy and excited. Like that's still there. But the list making has gone.
Staying on the list making topic, Adam Blake asks, what are the top 3 single episodes of TV each of you have ever seen?
Impossible.
The rules are you can't pick any more than 1 episode from a series. And it can't include Briar Patch Giraffe debut episode. Thanks.
I mean, in many ways, I think episodes 9 and 10 were, closer to the vision that I wanted to put out there.
I mean, that was group 2 of mine. Yeah.
No prob. Yeah. Impossible question. How dare you? Especially after
it changes
what we just
every
said.
single day. I tried to pick things that I felt like maybe ran a little bit of a gamut of kinds of TV.
Okay, you want to go first?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, in no particular order, I have the Cajun Country episode of No Reservations, Anthony Bourdain's travel show, where he goes into sort of Baton Rouge and beyond to, or just into Cajun Country in Louisiana, and goes to a series of cookouts, including sort of a night into the next day whole hog cookout. Yep. David Simon from the TV Creator is with him for some of it, but is the most sensual and romantic and life-affirming hour of TV that I think I've ever seen. And we've talked before about like still kind of like unsteady ground when it comes to revisiting Bourdain stuff, but and I'd like to talk about the Morgan Neville movie at some point when we're like kind of feeling it, but that is my favorite Bourdain episode, and that is like sort of like my favorite episode of like non-scripted TV. And then the other 2 that I have are Box Cutter, which I think is like a perfect Breaking Bad episode, and Breaking Bad's one of my favorite shows. And I think I've revisited Box Cutter a lot and thought a lot about how it's put together, and just for the hell of it, because it's really high up there. Looking at our list, Fennessy reminded me of this because he wrote about it. Eastbound and Down's first episode.
Oh my God. So great. I think that we should revisit Eastbound and Down just generally.
Yeah.
Because it's better than most things.
Yeah.
And it's really special. It's still, I think it holds up. It just purely makes me laugh. I'm so glad you put that in there. I think this is impossible. I do not stand by my own answers. I'm sorry. Like, I think that there's probably a Bourdain, maybe the Houston one, that just fills you with a kind of like just joy and connection that is very unique to that show. I'm glad you mentioned the documentary. I still can't I can't do it. I can't rewatch the show yet. Which sounds weird. I barely knew him, but it's too much. So the first one, the only one that was kind of easy for me was episode 29 of Twin Peaks, which is what we thought was the series finale.
Okay.
From 1991. And people have heard me talk before about how Twin Peaks was the most important show of my life, and it was and is. The more I thought about it, the more I thought that it's not the pilot, which is brilliant filmmaking, that did it, though. It was the finale, which is maligned in some quarters, but really is. I mean, Lynch came back to direct the last hour, and it is totally insane and totally disturbing. And what influenced me more than anything else wasn't just the sort of like totally gaga creativity. It was that it ended on the most painful cliffhanger imaginable. And the lessons that taught me about serialized storytelling and world building and disappointment, I still am not entirely over, even though we got that incredible season 3 that basically addressed it,
Sure.
I've never stopped thinking about that episode and where I was when I watched it and how it made me feel.
That's a lot like what we were saying with the movies, where it's like you just are not going to really ever get over certain movies that happened at a certain point in your life.
Exactly. Seeing that at 14 and being like, I'm sorry, what now? The other, I was holding a second slot for Prestige TV, that we've covered and thought about it, and I kind of wanted to be, I'm known as the bad boy of Prestige TV, so I wanted to like confound expectations and pick an underseen or misremembered gem. And I was going through, but even then I was sort of going through the crates of like Breaking Bad episodes, which there were many that were brilliant, especially some of those that run at the end, Ozymandias and Granite State. I was thinking about Sopranos episodes, trying to remember individual episodes of The Americans that maybe I thought were elevated. I almost settled on 2. One was, I know this is cheating to do this, but I'm sorry. The Constant from Lost, or just like
that was the episode that I believe we made
the best, right?
The best of the century, yeah.
Or just like the season finale where you saw the Egyptian statue's feet for the first time. Again, just like not everyone, but everyone that I was talking to or the internet, like seeing something like that together was so indelible and exciting and what the fucking and just awesome. Constant is just a marvel, and I do think still our best example of the type of genre. It's not a franchise, but I would call it franchise storytelling that we're all looking for, because what is the North Star for all of the stuff we talk about, whether it's Disney Plus TV shows or Star Wars movies or Game of Thrones spinoffs? If we're all looking for like the Han Leia moment, right? Like we're all trying to get that back. We're trying to find a perfect balance of head and heart and Redditing. And The Constant somehow made it look possible with time travel. It was a love story, but it was also a total head fuck. So I tried to do The Wire, but as David Simon always says, like these are just chapters in a book.
Sure.
So you kind of can't.
There are amazing episodes. Like The Wire has like maybe the highest floor of any show ever, but the ceiling is like with a couple of exceptions, like. And they're usually the gut punch penultimate episodes of seasons that Pelicanos would come and just, put us all in vacants. Like,
yes,
they kind of like kept it real steady. Like they never really indulged in the like gasp moment, other than some obvious exceptions, which I won't spoil.
Things in episode 9s. Though, I mean, no show has ever left me feeling like my relationship to that show left me feeling nothing.
Yeah.
Cumulatively after watching a season or being in the midst of a season.
You haven't picked a second episode yet, have you?
No, I'm going to do the cliche. I'm going to do the suitcase. We did a whole podcast about the suitcase, the Mad Men episode that is often cited as the very best one. I just, as someone who, dreams of watching more TV that can tell beautiful emotional character stories and also be funny and everything, and having that episode is just a marvel to me. And rewatching it has only made me more impressed by it. And also I think of it as the like crowning exemplar of cumulative serialized multiple season television storytelling, because every single thing in it that happens in this dance, and they do dance at one point between Peggy and Don, hits different because it's happening later in the show's run. Everything was building to that in a way that you just can't equate in other mediums. Last thing, also totally cheating, because I have not had time to rewatch this episode since I decided I was going to name it. But I was trying to think of like what is the kind of comedy feeling that I just miss and I'm always chasing. And it's not like the special 2-part episode of Family Ties, where Alex does Speed or whatever. And it felt too soon to be like, oh, Parks and Rec or the 30 Rock, where I laughed the most, like when Liz turns into the Joker. It wasn't that. So I picked the Bar Wars episode of Cheers.
Okay.
I don't even know if
Classic
it holds
material.
up.
Yeah.
But Cheers, just as an ensemble. And then one thing I didn't even remember is that Bar Wars, and there were multiple Bar Wars episodes. It's when the Cheers gang gets involved in a prank war with Gary's Old Town Tavern, the rival bar. In my mind, there was like one of these every year. It was just like, let's go back to the well. And then I was looking into it, and Bar Wars is the 23rd episode of season 6. I mean, that is how elite Cheers was, that it was just cranking out hit after hit. But that feeling that you can only get from an ensemble comedy on TV, where it's like, these are my friends, I know, and it feels like biblical, where it's like each character is so finely and sharply drawn, you know how they will behave in a situation, and oh my God, here's the best possible situation for them to be in.
All right, we're going to do 2 more. Here's one from John David Drake. Last week, Netflix canceled, this would probably be 2 weeks ago by now. Last week, Netflix canceled a batch of their traditional multicam style sitcoms, including shows with bigger names like Jamie Foxx and Kevin James. I believe the Kevin James show is called The Crew. And then, is this a sign that Netflix is getting out of the original sitcom game? Why is it hard for Netflix to launch successful, quote unquote, all audience comedies? They're certainly throwing a lot of money and top talent at it. I thought this was a pretty interesting question. I guess we haven't really talked very much about, we reference Netflix as Netflix is becoming TV, and there's just like a whole world of Netflix shows on there. And, there's certainly stuff that I'm checking out on Netflix, but we haven't really did a state of Netflix thing because it's something that's so hard to throw your arms around. I think that for this thing in particular, one thing you can't say about Netflix is that they're sentimental. So if whatever their proprietary data is that is telling them that a show is not working for whatever variety of reasons, whether it's about a cost effectiveness or whether it's just not reaching an audience or it's not reaching the audience it needs to reach to validate what they're spending on or what have you. I just do feel like when you read about that place, like if the Kevin James show isn't working, like they have a development deal with Kevin James, maybe they'll do another show with Kevin James, but this one they got rid of. If Kenya Barris wants out of his deal, they figure it out. You know what I mean? Like it's kind of cut and dry. There's not a lot of there just doesn't seem to be a lot of sentiment over there, which I think makes, sometimes it's difficult to develop a relationship with certain shows if there's just like a 3-season cap on everything and they don't, whether you want to say that's because they think that is like the lifespan of a show or whether they just don't want to renegotiate contracts with people after 3 seasons of success. I couldn't say. As far as the multicam shows go specifically, the one thing that Netflix hasn't really been able to do, and Andy and I opened this show talking about Sunday nights on HBO and the tradition that they have there, is they do not have a merchandising window. Like they have a homepage and they have a lot of algorithmic, like recommended if you like, and I saw this trailer started playing automatically when I opened up the app or whatever. Like there is definitely ways in which they put things in front of people. And in some ways, those things are way more effective than anything network TV can do. But what network TV does do for their sitcoms is they bunch them with a lot of sitcoms and they can create, or they used to be able to create a multi-hour experience of a couple of different shows so that you got the feeling that it was Thursday night on NBC or it was Friday night on ABC. Now, those may be retro ideas, but I don't think that they're completely out of fashion because look, we're talking about something that's like, 24 to 30 minutes long. It's got a very traditional structure. Like people probably they like to have like 50 of them, but they might not be like, it's the new episode of this Jamie Foxx sitcom is up. I can't wait to watch. It's more like they want to have that experience of like turning on the TV or turning on Netflix and having several of those things. And that's how Netflix does it. But I don't necessarily think that multicam sitcoms, unless they're like really pushing boundaries, are something that stand on their own. Do you know what I mean?
I think it's a great observation, and I think that there might be, and I don't profess to have any insider knowledge as to what their comedy strategy is, or if it exists, and what the general internal feeling about the response rates or click-throughs of multicam sitcoms are. But I think that it's similar to how they've tried and then basically given up on late night as well. It's just there's certain species of shows that don't survive out of their element, and I think that you've really hit the nail on the head in terms of it's just not experiential. It's not, you don't go to Netflix to see that, oh, Chelsea's dropped a new episode today at 4 p.m. That's just, and then there'll be another one tomorrow. It just wasn't the way people used the service. And I wonder if there's an element of that at play here as well. I think the bigger point to make, and one that we've sort of been talking about and nibbling about in conversationally on the margins, is that I still am not entirely sure if people are aware that Netflix today is in no way the company Netflix was 5 years ago or 10 years ago, from a development and even just personnel or goal and what their goals are. It's a fundamentally different company. And one of the things that we talked about at the time that seemed very smart about what Netflix was doing 4 or 5 years ago was that they were programming not just for the American consumer, they were actively programming for the town, which is different. They had at the end of every year, they had a very nice blend of Nailed It's and Flora's Lavas and Queer Eyes, all of which are very well-made examples of those types of shows and very good. But they also had Glow's, Masters of None, Mindhunter to put on for your consideration billboards to say, like, we work with David Fincher. These are the types of stories that we're going to tell. We're going to play to this is a cliche, but people think this way, to the coastal elite cities as well as to the heartland or whatever. That was part of the strategy. Cindy Holland, who is instrumental in that strategy, is no longer there. Bella Bajaria has sort of taken over and consolidated the programming. And I think that their goals are just fundamentally different. The goals are global. So that not just we watch Lupin here, but whatever the American Lupin is also able to play all around the world. Multicam American family sitcoms probably don't hit that bar. I think it's also worth noting Bella Bajaria was at UTV Universal before she went to Netflix, but then she was the one who took over and built that unscripted department. Yeah. And I think that you hear it and people talk about it, but I still don't know if people fully understand the margin to which unscripted is cheaper than scripted. I mean, it is exponential. It is outrageous how much cheaper it is, even a multicam sitcom. So, and it's scalable, right? And it's a brand you can sell around the world. Like, that is part of the focus. So all of this is to say, it's not just that we might not get more Kevin James sitcoms. I don't think we're going to get, we're certainly not going to get more Glow, which is still a crime. We're not going to get more Mindhunter. Maybe we will, because if Fincher was going to make another movie for them and they can work something out, but I don't see why that makes sense for them anymore. They're not in we need to attract a certain eyeball.
You know what?
Game.
Maybe down the line they change their mind. I mean, like, it's like these things, I think Netflix is here to stay. So it could be that down the line they decide that they do want to get back into scripted dramas. I mean, they might not have Ozark in 2 years and be like, you know what, we need it. Like, feels like that's a thing that we need. Yeah.
I agree. I was just thinking, this is not necessarily this question, but it was something that I was noticing that when I was doing the flip, I was like, we got to find something. And I was flipping around and I opened up Netflix, and not only had I not watched very much recently at all, but I was looking at the, watch again or continue watching. And my year in Netflix was interesting compared to past years to me. I mean, it was Queen's Gambit, obviously. By the way, there is no My Year in Netflix box that I know of. This was just me.
You can download your viewing history, though.
Oh, that's terrifying. But it was Queen's Gambit, which I think of as, we all do, as a triumph, but as Scott Frank, the creator, told us, was an outlier. There was one person there. It was like, I believe in you doing this, but you got to do it quietly in Germany for cheap. And then it became a global sensation. Bo Burnham's Inside, which we never talked about, but I finally checked out, which is awesome. And also what Netflix can do, because someone else made it and was like, here, you want to buy this? Netflix was like, yes, that works. Call My Agent, new season, which was a real bummer compared to the previous seasons. But again, that's what they do. Here's a French show. It hit, it clicked. People like it all the way around the world. And High on the Hog, which is the food show about the Black American diaspora and foodways. And it's really outstanding. Maybe we'll have a time or a place to talk more about it specifically. But that's something Netflix does really well too. But in terms of traditional, like, there's a reason why we went from Mayor of Easttown to White Lotus, and we're we stay grinding on Marvel Corner too, because they're pumping those shows out, and Netflix is not in those businesses right now.
Right. Now I'm looking at my continue watching, and much like my Spotify algorithm, somewhat compromised by my significant other.
Wow.
So,
are you going to drag her?
No, I'm not. I'm just like, I think that like I'll fall asleep and some sex life or Love is Blind gets watched or whatever. And I'm just like, this wasn't part of I want the ones and zeros to be real clean. You know what I mean?
Got it. Yeah.
Let's do one more question. We're going to save a bunch of these. I think Andy and I will probably return to them over the course of the summer, like he said. Last question comes from, this is probably like the most serious one we've got. Jordan Wilhelmi asks, how embarrassed would Andy be if he lost to CR on an episode of Top Chef Amateurs? And is that why we haven't heard anything about seeing you both on this first season?
Wow. First of all, let me say that Chris is my best friend, and I support him.
And you also are incredibly supportive of my culinary exploits.
His triumph is my triumph.
Yeah, my emotional sous chef.
Were he to defeat me, with some sort of miso-based marinade, I would Mr. Miyagi nod, as the student has become the teacher.
Yeah.
I also think, and this is based on, a quarter century of friendship, that one of the ways we're different in a number of ways, but one of the ways we are different is that Chris is a red light player, and I crumble often, I think, when the hot spotlights click on. And I think that it's possible that on a soundstage with Gregory and Tiffany Derry and Gail, like I would not perform. I can admit that. I use the same Zoom window for therapy, so this is safe feeling. But as evidence, we don't need to get into it, but there was a social event that Chris and I attended recently where a football was produced, and I saw a side of my guy that I rarely see, and it's the side that says, take this ball and deliver it into the bread basket.
Jalen Hurts emerged. Yeah.
And you just put the ball up and I'll come down with it as I am cannonballing into the swimming pool. And by God, he did it. He did it. Like we joke about Chris's exploits, at backstop in Little League and as a lifeguard, but he may pay for it the next day, but Chris leaves it all out on the floor. And so while I would want to win in a cooking competition, I would not be surprised.
I think that the issue for me would be the components of the dish. First of all, thank you so much for seeing me. I feel seen. I feel like I do a lot of things wrong, but I do enjoy like pressure situations. Like there's kind of like, when they're like, talk about Game of Thrones now. I'm like, sure. Maybe that's because I also don't mind being wrong. So that being said, I think I would be going into this cook with just like nothing to lose. Nobody would expect me to be I'm the guy who almost set his house on fire. I'm the guy who makes wet chicken. I'm the guy who, still can't understand marinades. You know what I mean? Now I've gotten secretly somewhat proficient at certain things. You know what I mean?
Love
I've
it.
started to develop my own techniques, but what I can't do, Andy, is I still haven't really mastered being responsible for multiple components of a meal.
Yeah.
And when you see chefs and they are assembling like their plates and like, we kind of critiqued on a little bit for missing plates in Top Chef, but I'm like, if I made one plate, I would be like, I should be working at Le Bernardin. You know what I mean? Like if I was able to get like 3 things on one plate within a certain time limit, that would be incredible. If I have to make 4, 5, 10, 12 servings, forget it. You guys can all have a chicken breast. Some of them will be done. And I'm going to roast some broccoli and we're going to see where we wind up.
But that's just a winning attitude. You know what I mean? Like there's an innate confidence
Do you
in
think
the
you would
born
get in your
athlete
head?
and born
Do you
competitor.
think you would just be like, I want to pay tribute to my story? Like,
I got in my head when you started saying the question. Like this is a fundamental difference. This is a fictional idea, and I'm already sweating bullets, and I'm not sure if I'm going to sleep tonight. So I think we have our answer.
Okay, we'll end it there. Andy, thank you so much for joining me. We'll be back later this week to talk about the finale of Loki and a couple of other things. Thank you guys so much for listening to The Watch. Thank you so much for sending in these questions.
Thanks to Isaiah Blakely for producing today. Kaya on vacation. We drove her to it, frankly.
Yeah,
she deserves
the White
it.
Lotus.
God bless. It's the least we could do was send her there.